Hello, hello. Welcome to a live stream from Zateo. We're live on Substack and on YouTube. I'm Mehdi Hassan. Today we're talking about the big story out of Texas, where House Democrats have fled the state, left the state. The governor, who's a Republican, Greg Abbott, is saying, you better come back or we're going to arrest you or I'm going to vacate your seats. And the reason they've left the state is because the Republican-controlled state house legislature in Texas is trying to pass a very controversial new map for Congress, for congressional seats, which would give the Republicans 5 extra seats, which I'm sure they would love to happen. One of the very prominent Texas House Democrats who has left the state is now in Illinois, is James Talarico, and he joins me now for this chat and to take my questions and your questions. Representative Talarico, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm a huge fan of you and this platform.
Appreciate the support. Appreciate you coming on. I know it's a crazy week for you. Let's just start with a very basic question for people who haven't been following this in detail. Why are you not in Texas doing your job, as the critics might say?
I would love nothing more than to be back home in Texas. I'm an 8th generation Texan. My whole extended family lives in my district, grandparents, aunts, uncles, my little baby niece. So I wish I was back there, but I'm here in this nondescript hotel room in Illinois because Texas Republicans are doing Donald Trump's bidding and trying to rig the next election in 2026. And we can't allow that to happen. I'm sure people have heard about redistricting and gerrymandering and quorum. Those are very, insider terms. And so I'll just take a second to explain very quickly what I mean. So at the beginning of every decade, state legislators adjust district lines after we get a new census, because when population changes, you want to make sure the districts have roughly the same amount of people. There's nothing wrong with that. That's appropriate and good. The problem comes when politicians draw their own lines, and they do it to protect themselves and their party. And this happens in both political parties, I should say, and that's called gerrymandering. It's wrong. It's actually the rot at the core of our broken political system. It leads to extremism. It leads to a democracy that doesn't actually deliver for regular people. But what's happening in Texas is actually a level above that. So instead of redistricting at the beginning of the decade, they are redrawing the political maps in the middle of the decade. This is 2025. And they're doing it at the direct request of the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the country, who is worried he's going to lose his majority in Congress in the next election because he's, wrecking the economy, starting wars, electing, people of his own party into these positions of public trust. And so we're pushing back against that, and we're trying to prevent our constituents' voices from being silenced in the democratic process.
So a lot to discuss about what's going on. You mentioned quorum. By you guys leaving, they can't actually hold the vote that they want to vote because they don't have enough present members. Just remind us, how many Texas Democrats have left the state?
57 in total.
And how many stayed behind?
I think maybe 6.
Okay, so the vast majority, like 90% of you have left the state. You're in Illinois. Other people have gone to other places. Before we get to the substance of what you raise, and it is a big democratic problem, I've spent years talking about the evils of gerrymandering. Politicians should not be able to pick their own voters. Voters should pick their own politicians. The United States is the only country in the Western world that allows politicians to pick their own voters. In the UK, in Canada, in France, it's done by independent redistricting bodies. But before we get to all that, just in terms of your situation, the Texas House voted yesterday to track down and arrest you and your colleagues who fled Texas. Governor Abbott is calling for your arrest. Now, these arrest warrants only apply within Texas state lines. But Senator John Cornyn, Republican senator from Texas, has urged Kash Patel to get his FBI to track you down and force you back to Texas. What is your response to these threats?
I mean, it's very consistent, because with these rigged maps, they are trying to rob my constituents and actually every Texas voter from being able to elect the representatives of their choice. And now they are literally trying to remove the people's representatives from the offices they hold. And so to me, it is just an extreme example of what they are trying to do in this country. And that is disrupt the democratic process. They are trying to hold on to power without any consequences from the voters, without any accountability. And that's not what the founders intended. They intended for power to be checked by the people and by the separate branches of government. And that's not possible if the most powerful man in the country is able to rig that election for himself and his party. So this is not an issue of Democrats versus Republicans. This is about whether or not we will have free and fair elections in every state, in every community across the country.
What would you say to your critics who say, when you say, well, this is not democratic, this is not what they count, they would say, well, you're not being democratic because you're not allowing them to have a vote on it. Go back, vote, and if you lose the vote, accept the results. What do you say to them?
Well, I would say that quorum breaking is protected by our Texas Constitution. It is a tool that the minority should use to check the majority, especially when the majority is cheating. And this is, in Texas, we love football. We love Friday Night Lights. So an analogy would be two football teams coming out of the locker room at halftime, and the team that's ahead decides they want to change the rules for the second half to make sure they win, right? Completely understandable for that team, but it is cheating, plain and simple. And so if the majority is going to cheat, the minority is not going to play. And I think most people can understand that.
Isn't the problem, and I agree with your analogy, but isn't the problem for you, as you conceded very honestly at the start of this interview, that the Democrats do it too? So if the argument is cheating, then if you're an American voter, you're saying, well, why should I care? Republicans and Democrats both, quote unquote, cheat.
Well, and I should draw a distinction between typical gerrymandering. Again, it's wrong, whoever does it, whichever party does it. But this is something different. This is rigging the rules in the middle of the game. And that's why I talk about halftime, because we agreed. We didn't break quorum when the Republicans gerrymandered in 2021. I spoke against the bill. I voted against those maps, proudly so. But again, that was the time to do it. And we agreed to these rules for the rest of the decade. And now, because they're worried they're going to lose, they're trying to change those rules. And it's being done at the direct request of the most powerful man in the country, because he doesn't want to face consequences for his undemocratic actions. That's why this situation is a little more unique. Agreed, yes. Gerrymandering is a problem that's kind of hurting our democracy at every level in every election, and we've got to deal with that. I've put forward a bill in Texas to have an independent, citizen-led process. Hasn't gotten a hearing, but we should have that in every state. But I do want to separate that from what's happening here, which is a particular instance of cheating that we all have to say no to.
You mentioned quorum breaking. I want to come back to Trump in a moment. You mentioned quorum breaking is something that has happened before. Democrats have left the state before. I remember it very well. My wife is from Texas. I follow Texas politics. But let me ask you this. How different is it this time? How different is the response? Are we seeing a more extreme, more authoritarian response from the Republican Party in this age of Trump?
I mean, yes. Talking about arresting us, talking about removing us from office, literally removing the people.
Can they do that legally?
I think it's pretty dubious legal ground, and I would urge all Texans not to take legal advice from Ken Paxton, the most corrupt politician in the country,
the Attorney General of Texas.
But the urge, the willingness to talk about arresting and removing elected representatives, that should be alarming to all of us, whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican. That is walking down a very dangerous path that we've seen other countries walk down, and it is fundamentally un-American, something we should all reject.
Just for people watching this at home, we have YouTube followers around the world. People are watching this interview right now in the US, in the UK, across the world. Explain to people why what is happening in Texas is so important. You mentioned earlier that this is gerrymandering like what we've never seen before, the timing. We've got midterms next year that all the polls suggest the Republican Party is on course to lose the House of Representatives, which could provide the Democratic Party with a check on Trump's authoritarianism. What difference would it make in Texas, and how would that affect the national scale? For example, had these maps been in place last November in 2024, how different would the result have been?
Well, they are taking a state that's relatively competitive. Texas has a reputation of being this deep red state that's actually not backed up by the data. Yep. We're much more of a pink state moving toward a purple state. And that's why you're seeing this reaction. They are trying to entrench their own power because they know that Texans are starting to reject the extremism they've seen. A private school voucher scam that's defunding schools, the most extreme abortion ban in the country that's endangering the lives of women and girls across our state, the rejection of Medicaid expansion, which means Texas has the highest number of uninsured people in the entire country. All of those things are leading to a more competitive electoral environment in Texas. That's why you're seeing them desperately cling to power. The only thing I want to add, Mehdi, is that the elephant in the room here is that the Republican Party is led by a president who has shown a complete disregard and disdain for the peaceful transfer of power. When he called Georgia Republicans and asked them to find him 11,000 votes, they said, no, sir. But when Donald Trump called Texas Republicans and asked them to find him 5 new congressional seats, they said, how about Thursday? And that's why Democrats have walked out of the chamber, have stood up to our Republican colleagues and the president. And I hope that our courage is contagious, because we desperately need everyone, again, both political parties and also not just politicians, but media figures and institutions to stand their ground. And we've seen way too much capitulation over the last 7 months.
100%. I should point out to people watching on Substack and on YouTube, if you do have questions for Representative Talarico, put them in the chat. We will try and get to them. We have him till 4 o'clock, so stick your questions in. Some are coming in. Dylan Rosine actually says, please fight fire with fire, fire versus fire, kind of what you were saying about courage is contagious. You've talked about the Texas Democrats showing a spine to the rest of the country, I know, in previous interviews. Let me ask you this. Are you advocating for Democrats fighting back in the same way? Because the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, the governor of Illinois, where you are, J.B. Pritzker, the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, have said, we're going to do the same now. We're going to do something similar. We're going to redistrict. We're going to gerrymander. We're going to help our party in the way that Abbott and Trump are helping their party. Number one, do you support that? And number two, does that then undermine your argument? Because it's very hard for you to say, well, it's bad if Texas is doing it, but I'm fine with New York doing it in response.
So these are thorny, strategic, and moral questions. You don't fight fire with fire; you fight fire with water. But you also don't fight fire. You also don't fight fire with a dripping faucet. You fight it with a frickin' fire hose, right? And so, what I'm advocating for is to stand up to bullies, to look them in the eye, and not flinch. Because we all know from our personal experiences, you don't beat a bully by playing dead. That doesn't work. You have to confront them, because bullies are a lot weaker than they appear. I think we all remember that from our own childhoods. That is true in politics too. And so my hope is that by Democratic states with Democratic trifectas moving forward with retaliation, that can convince Texas Republicans and Donald Trump to walk back from the brink. Not because they think it's the right thing to do. I'm not holding out for a profile in courage, but they may think it's not strategic, because the gains they could make in Texas could easily be wiped out with a gerrymandered California, where they have an independent citizen-led redistricting process. And I just want to say, I am very proud that I belong to a political party that still has principles, that still has a positive vision for how we can fix democracy and make it work for regular people. Ending gerrymandering is a central part of that vision, but we can't let that vision get in the way of current reality. And if one side cheats, then all bets are off. I'm hopeful we can walk back from the brink, because no one wants.
But just to be clear, if they don't walk back from the brink, you would say New York, California, Illinois, go for it.
That's right. While maintaining that vision, I think we can't.
Understood.
When you stand up to a bully, it's easy to become a bully yourself, and it's so important that we maintain that moral clarity of where we're trying to get, which is ultimately getting the politics out of redistricting.
I should point out that Republicans keep going around saying Democrats do this too. I should point out to people watching that the Democrats did put a piece of legislation at the federal level, the For the People Act in 2021, which would have banned gerrymandering of this kind, which would have brought in independent redistricting commissions, and every single Republican voted against it. And they were joined by Joe Manchin, the worst Senate Democrat, until John Fetterman came along. But James Talarico, let me ask you this. Do you think the Democrats should have done more on the front of democracy? Joe Biden, he never got, Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden, they didn't do enough to get rid of the filibuster. I was there at MSNBC at the time covering the For the People Act. It was killing me that they couldn't get this crucial piece of legislation through. That was a mistake, right? That they didn't throw enough energy behind getting that across the finish line?
It was a gigantic mistake, and I was there breaking quorum over the voter suppression bill in Texas. We went, instead of to Illinois, we went to Washington D.C.
I remember,
to beg our Democratic colleagues at the national level to pass the For the People Act so that they can circumvent voter suppression in states like Texas, and they failed to do so. And honestly, Mehdi, I think it's because national Democrats don't feel the same urgency that Texas Democrats do.
Yep.
Our constituents are living with Republican extremism on a daily basis. We see the consequences up close. We're not on the coasts. We're not comfortable with the status quo. And national Democrats sometimes use being in the minority as an excuse for inaction. Texas
Well
Democrats
said.
don't have that luxury. We've been in the minority for 30 years in our state. I'm hoping that's going to change soon if these trend lines continue. But we've had to learn how to use every tool in our toolbox to fight for our people and fight for our non-constituents too. The rural Republicans whose schools are being closed, whose rural hospitals are being closed, we're fighting for them too. And so Texas Democrats, I think, can show national Democrats what it means to fight, what it means to have a backbone.
Let's take some. I hope so. Let's take some questions from our viewers and subscribers. On Substack, Michael Connors asks, "How long are Texas Democrats planning on breaking quorum?"
It's a great question. We are taking this one special session at a time, and that means we've all agreed and committed to staying out of the state capitol for the next 2 weeks. That means we can kill these maps. We can end the special session without this power grab. Now, we can get engaged in a bunch of hypotheticals about what happens after that. The governor certainly has the ability to call us back if he chooses. These blue states are taking action as we speak. We'll see how that affects the calculus. But we have all agreed, at least for now, to kill these maps in this special session. And then if we come back, we'll assess our options and see what we have to do to fight for the American experiment.
And on that note, Lisa Duff on YouTube asks, "I thought the focus of the special session was disaster relief. Where does that stand now?"
Great question. So I mentioned we have 2 weeks left in the special. We had 2 weeks that we already completed. Texas Democrats were there for 2 weeks. We showed up on the first day of the special session, ready to work on actual problems. In our state constitution, special sessions are only for emergencies. The real emergency here is disaster relief and disaster prevention. We are still mourning the loss of life in the Texas Hill Country and throughout Central Texas. And instead of helping those victims and their families, instead of preventing a tragedy from happening in the future, Greg Abbott and Texas Republicans put flood relief and flood mitigation at the back of the agenda. They put it behind this Trump power grab. And so they are essentially using those victims and their families as leverage to try to steal the next election. And it is politics at its worst. It is rock bottom. It's deeply immoral. And it's something, again, we should all reject regardless of our party.
Quick question from Sue J on Substack. Is there any polling of Texas voters on whether they support what you're doing?
There may be. I haven't seen any. And honestly, when it comes to acts of courage like this, we can't really be concerned with public perception. If that was true, we wouldn't have seen any of the acts of courage throughout American history that we all
That's
benefit
a
from.
very good point. Karen Snorton on Substack and Maxwell Aronson on YouTube asked pretty much the same question. Karen asked, "What can we do? I feel very frustrated." Maxwell Aronson says, "What can I do as an Austinite," which is part of the area you cover, "to protest against this?" What can ordinary people do who are not Texas House Democrats?
Yeah, it's a great question. And part of us doing this is to inspire action. We're only 57 people, but we hope this is a lot bigger. There are 2 concrete things you can do. To answer the first one, for Texans and for Austinites in particular, there have already been protests outside the governor's mansion. There was one last night, and there are more being planned. So connect with your local grassroots organizations. I know Congressman Greg Abbott is back in Austin leading some of these protests, and so you should connect with his office to get involved with those direct actions. But then for those who aren't in Texas, those who live far away in other parts of the country, you can donate to help fund this operation. 57 people plus about 10 staff members fleeing the state, that costs money, travel, food, lodging, and we are relying on people power to fund this. The governor of Illinois is a billionaire, and we told him we didn't want his money. We are fighting for people, and we want people to fund this. So we are relying on grassroots donations.
But you are losing money, right? Just to be clear, by being out of state?
Well, so there are
you losing pay?
Yes, and there are personal fines that we have to pay. We are paying those ourselves, though. We do not want to use campaign funds or campaign donations to pay for those personal fines. That's a consequence that I and my colleagues have to deal with. We knew that was going to happen when we started this, and we're willing to pay whatever we have to. But the travel, the food, the lodging, that's very expensive too. And we can use campaign funds for that. So please donate to our individual campaign funds, or you can donate to us as a group at riggedredistricting.com. Riggedredistricting.com.
Pritzker probably wants to run for president. She should stop reminding people he's a billionaire. Just,
I'm sorry.
Just kidding.
Well, we're very thankful. We're very thankful for his hospitality.
Tropical Ding Dong, which is the only name you could find, only a name you could find in YouTube comments. Tropical Ding Dong asks, I've been hearing that Texas is about to turn purple. You mentioned turning purple. For almost 25 years. What's different this time?
Inside every cynic is a wounded idealist. So I understand where he's coming from. But there is reason for hope. If you look at the trend lines, I remember when I was growing up in Texas, Democrats lost statewide elections by 25, 30 points, blowouts. Yeah. Consistently over the last few cycles, even cycles that are tough for Democrats, statewide candidates in our party are losing by single digits. So the trend line is unmistakable. We're almost like, one of those football teams that hasn't broken through and won a championship yet, but our win-loss record is getting better every season. And so I wouldn't sleep on Texas Democrats. By the way, Mehdi, winning Texas is no longer a luxury. If you look at reapportionment numbers for 2030, unless the National Democratic Party has a plan to win Florida, Texas and flipping 100%. The state is going to be necessary.
Agreed. Jessica Philly on Substack asks about your livelihoods, which I think you dealt with, about paying the money. And Kramer is very happy that you said the word cheating. Keep repeating that Trump can only win by cheating, she says, which is the phrase you used to kick off. This is cheating, rigged redistricting, as you put it. Just before we wrap up, we're running out of time. I got to ask about you, because a lot of people heard of you when you did a viral speech, if we want to call it that, or statement about what Christianity means to you versus what it means to the Christian nationalists on the right. You are a very proud Christian and a Democrat as well. Others may have only just heard about you recently when you were on the Joe Rogan show. Who is he a constituent of yours? I don't know what part of Austin covers. I know you're near Austin, but not quite. But you went on the Joe Rogan. You were on the Rogan show, and he was so happy with what he heard from you, is that he suggested you should run for president. Will you be taking up on his advice?
No, I'm mostly focused on doing the job I have right now, which is taking up all of my time. But I do think that Democrats, especially younger Democrats, have to meet people where they're at. And people aren't reading newspapers, and they're not watching cable news. Young people are getting their information from Joe Rogan, from Mehdi Hassan. And so if we are not on these platforms talking about our values, talking about our vision for this democracy and how it can be fixed going forward, then we're going to keep losing elections like we did last year. This coalition has got to get bigger. We shouldn't be in a 50% territory against someone like Donald Trump. We should be having a 60% majority. Yes. And if we're going to build that, it's going to require us getting outside of our comfort zone, because politics is about addition and not subtraction.
Okay, so presidential, we'll see. You haven't quite ruled it out, but you don't sound that keen right now. Let's see. What about Texas Senate? You've talked about needing to win the state, talking about winning the Senate. Your name has been mentioned in multiple conversations. I believe you've had conversations with other potential Democrats who might want to throw their name in the ring, with a Joaquin Castro and others. Where do you stand in the Texas Senate race next year? Who should be the Democratic candidate who goes up against John Cornyn?
Yeah, that is a race I'm actually considering, unlike president. And I haven't made a decision yet. And that's not just me.
James, but if you win that race, then you can run for president. That's how it works.
Oh, I see how this works. Okay, you got to leapfrog.
Senator to president.
Yeah, I see. Okay. I guess I'm not a good enough politician to figure that out. But, I set a deadline for myself to make a decision by next week. That was before this quorum break happened. So I'm a little distracted. But once we get through with this, hopefully after we defeat Trump's power grab, I'm going to look at the Senate race and figure out if that's best for me and, more importantly, best for the people of Texas.
I know you got to go at 4, and I want to respect your time. One last question is, you mentioned earlier, kind of courage is contagious, Democratic backbones. We talked about the failures in 2021. One of my big critiques of the Democratic Party is they're far too cautious. They still play by old rules that Republicans don't play by. They still defer to institutions that Republicans don't respect. They're always in a defensive crouch. You're looking at the polling. Your party is polling lower than it's polled for decades. The people say they want new leadership in Congress. They say they're not happy with the Democratic Party. This is the base. What is your advice to the Democratic leadership in Washington, D.C.? What should the Democrats be doing right now that they're not doing?
Well, we shouldn't be defending institutions and norms and a broken political system. I know back in Texas that this democracy doesn't work for a lot of people, especially working people. And so we should be in the business of progress. We should be in the business of transformation. And so if we are just in a defensive position against Donald Trump, and I understand where that impulse comes from when you have a wannabe tyrant like Trump, but we cannot be satisfied with the status quo. We cannot defend the status quo. We have to put forward an exciting vision of how this democracy could actually work for regular people.
Well said. I hope people are listening in Washington, D.C., because your party isn't well led at the moment from where I'm sitting. I do hope your courage is contagious. I do hope people will take a stand across the nation, not just in Texas. And we will carry on following this story. We hope you'll come back to talk to us in the future, especially if you're able to get through this special session. For now, Representative James Talarico, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you, everyone, YouTube, Substack, for watching today. Appreciate you all. Go subscribe to Zateo.com.